Hello, and welcome to Spy Hard's podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur. And Scott, there's an old spinning wheel where my head is.
Could you pour me a shot of orange juice with a splash of vodka whilst you're at it, Cam?
You don't want me to be your bartender.
Actually, I think it's a drop of orange juice with a big splash of vodka. The way that device works.
You guys may need it by the end of this episode, but we'll find out. But before we get to this week's film, I guess it's best to introduce our guest. You just heard him there, but returning triumphantly to the show, it is the man himself, the creator of the Spy Command. It is Mr. Bill Koenig. Hello, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back. This is going to be an interesting episode, I suspect.
It's a strange juxtaposition from your last film. That was a very straight and down the line film. That was The Eagle Has Landed, a very good film in its own right, but very different to this week's film.
Yes, and this week's film actually helped me discover the original source material, which is among my favorites. Because we are talking about Murderers Row, the second Matt Helm movie, but this was the first Donald Hamilton Matt Helm novel I read. I checked it out of the public library in Bloomington, Indiana, and in fact, it was the movie tie-in edition because they had a still from the movie on the back cover.
That old chat classic.
I quickly discovered there's a much different tone between the source material and the movies.
There certainly is. There certainly is. Well, Bill, before we jump into this week's film, let's catch up a little bit. You run the Spy Command. You oversee what's happening in spy media. Let's just say it that way. A Bond film has come out since you last came on the show. A lot of revelations have taken place. What's been new with you?
You know, it's really been like a desert, actually. It's like, there's not been a whole lot going on. The Russo brothers had a Netflix movie in the summer. Mission Impossible got delayed into 2023. We keep hearing stuff on the Bond front, but not very much. They've been, with No Time to Die, it's not been a victory lap. It's been a victory marathon. And really just getting kind of tired of it. Like, guys doing anything? Now, just as we record this, there have been some rumors via the Sun tabloid in the UK, but I'm not sure exactly how seriously to take that. Mostly because nobody else has gotten out on that limb. They've summarized the Sun, and we're talking specifically about what's his name, Aaron Taylor Johnson.
That's him.
Yeah, but until somebody else confirms that story, I'm gonna kind of sit back and watch it in a very detached way because the Sun's stories have been very lacking. In fact, I did a post recently about that, just how they're lacking, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's. I mean, this whole Aaron Taylor Johnson thing. Just to pick on that for a second. It is what it is. I'm not too sure how much stock I hold in the Sun newspaper. In fact, I'll go out on a limb and say I hold none in the Sun newspaper. It's basically trash. So, yeah, I don't really... I mean, if it turns out to be him, I'll eat crow. That's great. But, yeah, I don't really hold them in high esteem when it comes to journalistic integrity.
No, I mean, Aaron Taylor Johnson's a pretty well-known quantity. Obviously Kick-Ass, and he's worked in many movies, Tenet, of course, and he's going to be the
Bullet Train.
He's going to be the lead of Kraven the Hunter coming up. I don't know. How many times have the Broccoli's hired like a legit known movie quantity to lead the franchise? Not much. Pierce Brosnan was a TV guy mostly. Roger Moore was a TV guy mostly. That's what they were known for, but they haven't really hired movie stars.
Well, Sean Connery was, he had acted in a lot of movies, but he certainly wasn't a star. And I suppose you could say Aaron Taylor Johnson kind of is like that. he is 1 year older than Connery was when he was cast and when he did Dr. No. He has a lot of experience, but he's not a star. I mean, about Taylor Johnson, and that was true of Connery as well. So in that, there's some superficial patterns similar to Connery's, but that's not enough for me to buy into it. And again, by the time this goes out, maybe we'll know. But one thing in particular that struck me weird about Sun, they're going to make an announcement in March. It's like, well, why March? They don't say. Like, well, and meanwhile, Barbara Broccoli has publicly, repeatedly said, Bond 26 won't be filming for 2 years at least. You think the Sun might note that, but no, they don't even mention it. So these are the kinds of things why I'm suspicious. Again, when somebody else goes out on the same limb that the Sun's gone out, I'll reconsider. But for now, I'm on the skeptical side. But I mean, I could see why. I mean, somebody was on Twitter. It was a still from some movie of him naked sitting on top of a toilet. Well, he's very fit. That's
that's what Scott and I do to promote the podcast.
They're asking us to put clothes back on.
Yeah, like, please, audio only.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose then pivoting from one potential James Bond to someone who definitely tries in many ways to be James Bond, Cam. What are we talking about this week?
Yeah, Bill mentioned it. We are talking about 1966's Murderer's Row, the follow-up to 1966's The Silencers.
We explored the first film in the Matt Helm saga just last year, actually not too long ago. But we're back for seconds and in the same year.
Yeah, they were cranking them out for sure.
Well, apparently, my understanding, I don't want to preempt Cam's intelligence report, but apparently it wasn't,
or lack thereof.
Well, apparently the deal was, the spoof Casino Royale was supposed to come out for Christmas of '66, but through its various permutations and problems, Columbia, we need something like Irving Allen. Can you get Murderer's Row out in time for Christmas? And they did. So that's why there's 2 Matt Helm movies the same year.
Are you saying, Bill, that Murderer's Row is a Christmas film?
I guess I am. It's a Christmas release, put it that way.
That's about as much Christmas as you'll get in Die Hard, so there you go.
Yeah.
I've got a real Die Hard problem at the moment. I don't know why. But, okay, I think before we get into our initial experiences, let me read you all the letterboxd.com synopsis. And if you remember the last time we delved into Matt Helm, it was quite a mouthful.
That's right.
Murderer's Row. Matt Helm outdoes Matt Helm in his all-new adventure. The handsome top agent Matt dies in a tragic death in his bathtub. The woman mourn about the loss. However, it's just fake for his top secret mission. He shall find Dr. Solaris, inventor of the helium laser beam, powerful enough to destroy a whole continent. It seems Dr. Solaris has been kidnapped by a criminal organization. The trace leads to the Côte d'Azur.
Wow.
Dum, dum, dum.
I mean, got kind of fancy there by the end. Wow.
It did. It sort of improved itself as it went along. It started a bit trashy and then ended up in sort of a mystery novel. I quite like it.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. Well, I'm just curious, before we dive into Murderer's Row, I would just love to know, Bill, your thoughts on The Silencers, because we got an hour and a half to explain our thoughts on that movie a while back, but I'm just curious where, you stand on that one.
Well, it's, it's funny. I saw the trailer in the theater, but I didn't actually see it until it had its TV debut on ABC here in the States. The world television premiere, The Silencers. And I discovered later the ABC broadcast was a bit heavily edited. But
no,
it was 12 minutes.
No, it was longer than that. All the commercials.
It was just The Silencer, singular. There was no plural.
Yeah. But I enjoyed them. I enjoyed. It was funny. It was The Silencers and Murderer's Row were on ABC, and The Ambushers and The Wrecking Crew were on CBS. So, there was a split in terms of which networks showed the films. but I enjoyed them. And like I said earlier, it spurred me to find out more about the source material. And Murderer's Row was the first novel I read. And then in the early 70s, there was like this massive reprinting. I don't know if they came out with the 13th title in the series, The Poisoners, and they reprinted almost all of the titles up until then. They might have skipped one or two, but so like I bought them all and I I gobbled them up in like about a week. And you know, I think Donald Hamilton was like a really, really good writer. I've described the Helm literary books as a cross between Ian Fleming and Mickey Spillane. You've got that first person narrative like with Mike Hammer. And but some of the plots are just as fantastic as anything Fleming came up with. And I remember in particular, I've read many of them multiple times. I was rereading The Ambushers a few years ago, and suddenly it just came to me. I was coming to the climax of the book. It's like, wait, Matt Helm's having a machete fight with an ex-Nazi while there's a missile in the background that's getting fired up, ready to launch. I said, this is preposterous. This is just as preposterous as anything in Bond. But that first-person narrative just sucked you in, and you were like, you know. So I mean, again, I think I think he was a really good writer. He's obviously no longer with us. He passed away in 2006. Yeah, so it's I enjoy the movies for what they are, but the movies caused me to discover the books. And over time, I've had more enjoyment from the books than I have from the movies. But yeah,
it's interesting that charting the course between our first guest, AJ Chowdhury, who joined us for the Silencers, discovered the books through the first film, and you obviously did as well. It seems to be, especially for those who were sort of watching it around the times, quite the anchor to take you into the books.
Yeah, the original trailer for the Silencers, you can find it on YouTube. It ends with the covers of 8 Matt Helm books, based on the thrillers by Donald Hamilton. So at least in the promotion for the Silencers, they were promoting Donald Hamilton really quite a bit.
I'm sure the Hamilton estate were very thankful for that.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, in 1991, a Hamilton fan wrote the author, and Hamilton wrote back. And, he was, because I belong to this Matt Helm page on Facebook. It's devoted to the books. And so I contacted the guy. I said, would you mind if I did a post about this letter you got from Hamilton all those years ago? And Hamilton was very realistic, shall we say, about how authors are treated by Hollywood. And he was kind of like, well, he said it better than this, but essentially the gist of what he said was, well, the check's cleared, and and also it did cause the book sales to go up. I mean, despite how drastically different the movies were, it helped his sales. He did say, I believe there was a postscript where he said, however, if you want to see a movie where they took one of my books and I liked it better, go see the Big Country from 1958 with Gregory Peck and Burl Ives and so on.
Good movie.
I wonder if sales of the Destroyer books went up from Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins.
They went down.
Yeah. The publishing house went out of business.
It spontaneously exploded.
Sorry, Remo fans. Okay, well, Bill, we got your connection to it. Obviously, you found the books through the films. Cam, I don't imagine you'd seen any of this film at all.
No, I hadn't. No, I had seen 0 Matt Helm films before we started this journey.
And yet you did own all of Ann-Margret's wardrobe from this film.
Of course. I'm wearing that shag dress right now.
Or those bell-bottom pants.
That a shag dress has 2 different meanings.
True.
I think, Cam. And I think I know which one you meant out of the two.
There's also the matching swimsuit and bindle that I thought was amazing.
What's a bindle?
It's like the thing that, like, back in the old days, you'd see the old-timey hobo carries, like,
yes, that little bag on
the stick with the bag on, on the end of it.
It's so weird that you know that. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, it's actually not weird that you know that. That's actually not weird. Okay, well, that's kind of set up our venture into the Murderer's Row. So I guess all we have to do now is really explore its nooks and crannies.
Yeah.
Over to you, Cam.
Yeah, so this was based on the 5th Donald Hamilton novel. And Bill, please jump in if there's anything that jumps out to you, because I know you are the expert on this, especially this sort of decade of spy films. But the book was published in 1962. And as Bill mentioned, this was a Columbia being like, can you get this movie out fairly quick? So Irving Allen put this movie together, and it was released 10 months after the first film, which is really unheard of. Like, that is real fast tracking. Now, initially, in one of the early reports, they announced, obviously, Dean Martin was coming back, but they also announced that Stella Stevens would be coming back. And then about 3 months later, they announced that Ann-Margret was cast. So I don't know if that was just assumption on the part of the Variety article or what was going on there. But yeah, I mean, that would have been interesting.
There was also Nancy Kovacs, who had a small role in The Silencers and whose character was killed. She was supposedly coming back to play Miss January. But then she ended up marrying this really rich guy and said, no, thanks. And so they got some other actress to play Miss January.
I'm still waiting for my rich guy.
Yeah.
I wish I knew all this, because I got to meet Nancy Kovac a while back at a Star Trek convention. I would have asked her these burning questions.
Oh, hey, what does she play in Star Trek? I should probably know.
Oh, I can't remember the character's name, but she's in the episode Private Little War.
Okay.
You know, she was in 2 episodes of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. She was in the pilot to Bewitched as a brunette instead of a blonde. I mean, she was all over the 60s, and she finally retired from acting in 1976, I think it was, in an episode of Canon, a QM production. So, but I mean, she was all over the place. I mean, just a very familiar face to Americans.
But Cam, you mentioned about Stella Stevens coming back, which I would have been all for. She was fantastic in the first film. But didn't the end credits, like, they had a post-credit scene in The Silences, which was a very much a new thing at the time. But didn't it say that there would be an actress coming back, or Dean Martin would be meeting this person in...
It said Matt Helm meets Lovey Kravitz. Lovey Kravitz was his secretary. Of course he'd be meeting her in Murder.
Yeah. And that was the same actor that played both, right?
Yeah. She, Beverly Adams, who I believe went on to marry hairdresser, hair beauty.
Vidal Sassoon.
Excuse me, yes.
I should know. I have almost no hair left. Okay, that makes sense. So, but what happened with that then, Cam?
With, like, Stella Stevens?
Yeah.
Don't know. It just was reported initially, and then nothing. So I don't know if plans changed. I don't know if it was an assumption on the part of the reporters who were writing the story. I'm unclear. Or maybe the studio just thought, yeah, we could do that. And then when they actually had a script, they realized that was not where the direction was going. So yada, yada.
Sure.
Now, the script, the first draft, it seems, was written by Oscar Saul, who wrote...
Actually,
yeah, I want to talk to you about this, Bill.
Apparently, the first draft was by Richard Levinson and William Link, the creators of Columbo.
So this is where I get confused, because, like, okay, I saw those names too, but it was always attached to the Ambushers. And I looked it up, but it's like, it does pop up. But also, I looked up on the University of California archive, and they have archives for all the scripts that one of the other writers on this movie worked on, Herbert Baker. And they mention this one, and they credit the original draft to Oscar Saul. So I was very confused.
Well, I don't know how he pronounces his name. Bruce Savali. It's his ebook. Because I looked at it this week before this recording. According to him, the first draft was by Levinson Link. Then Oscar Saul came in, and then Herbert Baker. But only Herbert Baker got a credit, and Baker got a backdoor kind of credit in The Silencers. It said parodies by Herbert Baker. It's like, I think today the Writers Guild would like slap him down pretty hard for trying to sneak something like that in, because the WGA is very, it's like, we have the final say on movie credits, buddy, and like, don't do that. But Herbert Baker, I should have looked up his resume, but I do know.
Oh, I've got it.
Oh, he wrote at least one Martin and Lewis movie.
Yeah, he wrote Artists and Models.
And he also wrote for variety shows. So, like, he was a writer on Danny Kaye's variety show in the 60s. And in 1959, there was this Fred Astaire special that got like 9 Emmys. And he got a credit that says special material by Herbert Baker. So, and I think he might have even been a writer on the Flip Wilson show, which is like, it's like, so he did movies and he did TV variety shows. And, yeah, but for whatever reason, only Baker got a credit in the movie, in this movie.
Yeah. I was wondering if, with the case with Lincoln Levinson, if they were brought in to write the next Matt Helm, their work was carried over to Ambushers, and then the Saul script became Murderers Row. Like, I was trying to figure out why their names are so attached to Ambushers, but they may have been brought in to write the second Matt Helm film.
Possibly. Actually, Levinson and Link did have their own spy thing. It was a TV movie, not a theatrical movie, called Istanbul Express,
Right.
with Gene Barry and Marianne Mobley and John Saxon, which I remember watching as a kid on TV. And about a year or two ago, I discovered it on YouTube and I watched it, because I had this, and then I lit up when I saw the Levinson and Link writing credit. So I guess they always had a hankering to do something spy related, and they finally did, credited with that TV movie.
Yeah. And like with the case with Oscar Saul, who'd written on The Silencers when he worked on this movie, and Scott, you and I covered him for All Through the Night, which he also wrote.
Oh, wow.
But it was a case where whatever he wrote was pretty much completely rewritten by Herbert Baker, to the point where he didn't get a credit. And Herbert Baker, as Bill said, got sole credit. And he had, as Bill also mentioned, come in on The Silencers. So he would also carry over to The Ambushers, which we'll tackle a little bit further down the road. And yeah, like he also
wrote the lyrics to the title song of The Ambushers.
Yes, and he also wrote another spy film called Hammerhead that we'll cover in the future as well.
Right, and another Irving Allen production.
Mm-hmm.
At that featured a character named Charles Hood. I saw Hammerhead once. It wasn't even on primetime TV. It was like the CBS late movie. I was really curious, because again, at the public library, I saw a copy of Hammerhead, and it was a movie tie-in edition. It's like, what? Irving Allen, Herbert Baker, what's this? And so when I had a chance to see it on late night TV, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that's what it is.
So you're not pitching yourself to come back for our Hammerhead extravaganza episode?
Well, let me know. I'll just, but the trick is trying to find a copy of the movie. I've got the Matt Helm movies on DVD, so that's
that is a genuine constant struggle that we face sometimes. Is we have that list of films, ever-growing list of spy films, but we have to just say no to a lot of things because people can't find them. If you can't get them on VOD, how can you expect people to listen to a review when it doesn't exist?
Right.
But please do continue, Ken.
Yeah, and so the director Henry Levin was brought in to helm the movie, pun intended, gloriously so. And he got his start as a dialogue director in the 1943 film Appointment in Berlin, before moving into just being sole director. His major debut was 1944's Cry of the Werewolf. That sort of sets the tone for what his career is going to be over the next while. It's a lot of like studio kind of B movies, thrillers, horror stuff. Really interesting director.
Probably his most prestigious film might be Journey to the Center of the Earth with James Mason and Pat Boone. And also, in the middle of the spy craze, he knocked out 3 movies in a very short amount of time. He did this one. He did Kiss the Girls and Make Them Die. And they did The Ambushers. And those all appeared within a year, 14 months. And Kiss the Girls and Make Them Die, that falls into what Scott was talking about, trying to find these things. It's because, like, I got a VHS copy, a bootleg VHS copy. I don't think it's ever had a proper home video release. Last time I saw it was on YouTube and had German titles, but the soundtrack was in English. Kissing Girls and Make Them Die, I jokingly refer to it as Moonraker 66 because there are a number of remarkable similarities between it and Moonraker, which came out 13 years later.
Oh, what about it compared to In Like Flint?
In particular, one scene where Mike Connors. Okay, Moonraker, you have British male agent, American female agent. It's the other way around in Kiss the Girls and Make Them Die. American male agent, British female agent. And there's one scene where he breaks into her place and discovers she's an agent. And it plays out remarkably similar to the corresponding scene in Moonraker. I mean, extremely similar. And that's something for another day if you ever decide to go there. But
we'll go there.
But Henry Levin, directed that as well. So, yeah.
And I think that Kiss the Girls and Make Them Die, it was also a bit of a Dr. Goldfoot 2 situation where there's the American version and the Italian version.
Don't do this to me, Cam.
Sorry.
Is Franco and Chicho going to turn up and eat a sandwich again?
I hope not. I hope not. It's notable, though, Bill, you mentioned Journey to the Center of the Earth from 1959, which is an incredibly fun movie. I was lucky enough to see that on the big screen a handful of years ago. There's a local art house theater that does Sunday morning sort of like family classics, and they'll show stuff from the 50s, 60s, 70s, etc. And they showed Journey to the Center of the Earth, and it was a blast to see. That's one that I think deserves more attention. He also did the 1965 wannabe epic Genghis Khan that I really need to watch.
Yeah. Again, he's one of these like journeyman directors that got a lot of work. And these days, journeyman is become almost like an insult, but it really is not an insult.
No.
A journeyman can we need someone to direct this movie and we need to have it done within a certain time frame. And a journeyman can like handle all sorts of genres and so forth. And so when I call him a journeyman director, it's for me it's something of a compliment. But
I wish that you hadn't clued in, Cam, that journeyman director was an insult, because I've been calling him that for the last 10 years, and he thought it was a real compliment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like so true. You look at like Michael Curtiz, who directed Casablanca, but did Adventures of Robin Hood, did all of these amazing movies in all different genres. And yeah, like nowadays it'd be frowned upon because, well, he doesn't have a specific, distinct style and list of obsessions that he focuses on again and again and again. Yeah.
His last movie was a Western with John Wayne, The Comancheros.
Good movie.
And supposedly Curtiz's health was kind of failing at the time, and John Wayne kind of jumped in and did some uncredited directing on that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, a guy like Curtiz could handle anything, and and you needed that, particularly when he was active in the studio system. You needed to, you needed to be versatile, and someone like Curtiz, or to a lesser degree Levin, was like that.
And I want to give Henry Levin a real shout out for a credit. He only had one acting credit to his name, but he played a prefect in the Planet of the Apes show from the episode The Horse Race, which is episode 9, I believe. And I really like that show. I think fans of shows like Star Trek or whatever would really dig the Planet of the Apes TV show. It was very short-lived, but that's a fun episode. And I love that this guy was in ape makeup for a hour of television.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
So, couple casting notes I'll mention. Dean Martin at this point, like, this is the Dean Martin craze of the 60s. The Dean Martin show is very popular. So, like, his stock is very high.
Well, I was going to say, the Martin and Lewis team broke up in 1956. And when that first happened, people thought Jerry Lewis, he is the brains of the outfit. He is the guy. And Dean Martin, he's just, he may not make it. But if anything, it was kind of more the other way around, or at least, Lewis did okay, but Dean Martin, he after the breakup, he invented the Lush Act, and he would go on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and Carson would play along, and he would say, "Hey, Dean, I know that it's just an act when you drink," and so like Dean Martin hands him this cup he's been holding, and then Johnny Carson does this exaggerated outtake. Oh, that's real stuff. He did that joke at least twice. I've seen reruns of the show, but yeah, that was part of his act, to supplement the singing, and that's how he got on shows, and then eventually got his own show. So because in fact, and there's even a joke in the middle of this movie that plays on that. He's in this contraption, and they put this little miniature bomb on it, and he's going up and down. Says, guy like me drank all his life, ended up like a milkshake. And, it's like, let's not just break the fourth wall. Let's smash it to pieces.
He's like incredible in these movies in a very like 60s way. I like him a lot. As for, Ann-Margret comes into this movie, and she had a big launch in the early 60s with like movies like Bye Bye Birdie, State Fair, Viva Las Vegas. So like this is like Ann-Margret at like the cool point. Like she's a sex symbol, but she's also like incredibly cool to like youth culture out there. And so it made a lot of sense to bring her over. And this was like a really busy year. She had 4 movies out in the year of 1966. Obviously this one, but Made in Paris, The Swinger, and the remake of Stagecoach. So
yes.
Yeah.
That was a big, that's a really good movie. I mean, remakes, a lot of fans say, why would you remake something like that? But that is I've seen them both. That is a really good movie, and she's very good in it. That might be sort of the very beginning of her starting to take on more serious roles. But yeah, anyway, for the uninitiated, it's a remake of a 1939 movie that made John Wayne a star. Anyway, but it's also the last movie with Bing Crosby in it. He's the alcoholic doctor, who was played by Thomas Mitchell in the original. So, anyway, sorry, didn't mean to go sideways.
No, I mean she's clearly a bundle of energy in this film, so I can totally buy that she had the energy to do 4 films in 1 year.
Yeah. Oh yeah, big time. Like this was the real like hot period for her, but she would have a long career. She's still, I think, acting to this day.
She's credited in something in 2022.
Yeah, still going.
Yeah,
and she's fantastic in the movie Carnal Knowledge from the 70s, opposite Jack Nicholson as well.
That, I think, is when she really started to come into her own as a serious actress. Anyway, yeah, around that period. So her respect as an actress definitely shot up, late 60s into the 70s.
And a couple other notes. This was the film debut of Soon Tek Oh, who played, at the very start of this movie, Tempura, the Japanese secret agent that is murdered. He would play Hip in The Man with the Golden Gun, Bond's contact in that film, and have a long career. He's in the animated Mulan movie. He's in tons and tons of stuff, but this is where it started.
He's in 8 episodes of Hawaii Five-0, including the pilot.
Right.
Usually as a spy, usually as an enemy spy, but there was one Wo-Fat episode where he was the dupe. But yeah, and I'm trying to think what else he was. He was in a lot of things.
Definitely. And then this movie also announces that the musical trio Dino, Desi, and Billy would be appearing in the film, and we get a scene with them at a discotheque. Bill, I believe you know a little bit as to who these gentlemen are.
Dino is Dean Paul Martin, Dean's son. Desi is Desi Arnaz Jr., and I'm sorry, I couldn't tell you who Billy is.
But we like you anyway, Billy.
Yeah. He's our pal. And,
Yeah.
and of course, again, talking about breaking the fourth wall. So there's this discotheque scene, and Matt Helm is he's not forced into dancing. It's just through circumstances. Then, Dean Paul Martin's, now you're swinging, Dad? Dad? And then Ann-Margret says, he calls everybody dad. Don't he know? And
Until you pointed this out to me, I didn't get that, and now I completely understand that joke. Thank you both.
It's not a case of like a famous musical act showing up. Like, say this was like the Monkees or something, you'd be like, oh, of course, I understand who the Monkees are. In this case, this was not the Monkees.
they are not up to the level of the Monkees, I'll tell you that right now. But years ago, I read this biography of Dean Martin. And so Dino, Desi, Billy, in fact, it's the song they sing in the movie. It was like briefly number one or really highly ranked. And Dean's career was kind of like sort of in a slump. I mean, he hadn't had a number one hit in a while singing. And so sort of like Dean Paul was kind of letting Dad have it. Then Dean Martin records Everybody Loves Somebody, which goes up to the number one. And so, yeah, kid, I'll show you that. Dean Paul Martin died in, I believe he was a reserve officer in the Air Force. And in 1987, he was flying a jet. Weather got bad, and he crashed the plane crashed. Right. And Dean, in real life, Dean Martin was never the same after that. Like I said, this is about 1987, and Dean Martin died 95, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, it absolutely crushed him in real life. But that's what's going on here. And again, it's breaking the fourth wall and all that.
Very playful scene for sure.
Yeah.
And just in terms of the box office, this movie, the numbers are a little tough to track down specific hard numbers for this one, but the Silencer's numbers were actually easy. Like, it made $16.3 million. This one I've seen credited with $17 million as having outgrossed the first one by a little bit. And the top three for the year, number one was The Bible in the Beginning. Number two was Hawaii, starring Julie Andrews and Max von Sydow. I need to watch that at some point because I feel like I've mentioned it on the show so many times.
I should watch The Bible in the Beginning because I've made jokes about that film so many times.
Yeah, I've seen it.
John Huston's in it. He may have even directed it, but I think he plays Noah.
I think a few people directed it.
Might be one of those, yeah.
Yeah. And then number three was Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And the final note I had on this movie was just in regards to the fifth unproduced Matt Helm film, The Ravagers, which obviously didn't happen. I'll go into the details of kind of what the story was when we wrap up the franchise and we talk about The Wrecking Crew. Mm-hmm. But there was a note about that movie with this one, which was that Dean Martin refused to, come back for the fifth one. And so Columbia held up his share of the profits on Murderer's Row as like revenge.
Well, in the previous episode about the Matt Helm movies, it was stated about how Dean Martin was making more money than Sean Connery was. And I remember AJ said he mentioned that, and then he kind of added, if it's true. Well, it is true.
Yeah.
And here's why it's true. I don't think he got into the reason. If you look at the copyright notice, and everyone's going, Bill, why are you talking about copyright notice? Well, you find out things if you read the copyright notice. So to get Dean Martin, they had to make him a partner. So the copyright notice is Meadway, Meadway - Claude. Meadway is Irving Allen. Claude is Dean Martin. So I think he got like 10% of the gross of these movies. So that's why. So even though these movies did not make nearly as much money as the Bond movies did, but Dean Martin's getting a whole lot more of the take. And so this did not go unnoticed by Sean Connery. So it was shortly after that Connery said, "Hey, make me a partner." Well,
that's right.
But but Albert R. Broccoli, he already had one partner he'd rather not be dealing with, and so he was not going to take on a second. And
I know what that feels like.
Yeah. So that's how Dean made so much money off these films, because they had to. Like, that's how, that's what it took to get him. So
that makes sense. Yeah, and it also makes sense why I'm guessing he was probably angling for a little more money off a fifth one, and yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Let's see how The Wrecking Crew does for financials before we judge, I guess.
For sure. But yeah, that wraps me up for behind the scenes on Murderer's Row.
All right. Time to get on board the hovercraft, folks. Fasten your seatbelts and remember the no smoking sign is lit up. Here we go. Bill, you're our guest, and you've ventured back into the world of Matt Helm. What do you think of Murderer's Row?
Like I say, it is entertaining for what it is. It's essentially the Dean Martin show turned into a spy movie. And, because it's like, oh, here's Dean with a song. There's an old spinning wheel where my head is. And then, and here's Ann-Margret. It's going to dance for the next 5 minutes.
5? It's like
10,
She's
15.
still dancing now.
it's still going on. It's, and again, it's, like I said, Donald Hamilton was very, he knew what the score was. It's like, the checks are clearing and my book sales are going up. I'm not gonna make a fuss about this. And it is interesting. The movie does have more Hamilton bits than you might realize. And I don't want to go too into the weeds, but okay. In the book takes place in and around Chesapeake Bay. There's a missing scientist. He's come up with a device that can track submarines. And he has a daughter who is concerned about him and thinks this one couple is behind it. And so in the movie, they change it from submarine detection system to helio beam or whatever the hell it is. It's kind of, the science is a little shaky. And but it has something to do with the sun. So in the book, the scientist's name was Michaelis, so they changed it to Solaris. The daughter's name was Theodora, or she was known as Teddy, so they changed it to Susie. But Helm's double alias, because his cover is Jim Peters, but if anybody checks very far, it'll come back as Lash Patron, a Chicago mobster.
Classic gangster name.
Yeah, so that's retained in the movie. Now the book is, again, it's a lot grimmer than the goings on in the thing, because Helm's assignment is there's this fellow agent, a woman agent, who is supposed to infiltrate by posing as a sort of alcoholic trader, and he is supposed to beat her up, and he's been given a specific this is what you do, because the idea was like you'd break her arm and then you'd get a cast, but the cast would have weapons in it. But he's in the middle, he's not even halfway through the procedure, and suddenly she dies. Like, oh, oops. And so he eventually takes over the mission, and it's Hamilton, it sucks you in with the first person narrative. Anyway, it's good. It's a good book, and it's not necessarily my top favorite, but it's pretty good. It's like, say, the first one I read. So,
and do you enjoy the movie version? Does the movie to you hold up in comparison, maybe, to the Silencers?
Yeah. I mean, again, it's you're not going in expecting a faithful adaptation of Donald Hamilton. In fact,
right.
in this movie, it's probably surprising there's as much Hamilton present as there is.
Right.
But, again, it's like, if you like Dean Martin, you'll like this movie. And it's like, Dean had this, certainly his public persona was like this really easygoing one. And if you like that, it's pretty easy to get, drawn into it. Like I said, he made that joke, bringing in his Lush act about, ended up like a milkshake after I've been drinking booze all my life. But, if you like Dean Martin, it's fine.
It's an interesting sort of evolution from the first one, I found personally. In many ways, it doesn't do anything differently. It's almost like a copy and paste job from the first one.
Especially towards the end.
Yeah, especially towards the end. Thank you, Cam. I'm glad you picked up on that too. But all the things that worked for me in the first one are all still firing on all cylinders in this one. I think Dean Martin is still a fantastic lead. I could watch him do the Dean Martin show shtick any day of the week. And twice on Tuesdays is what they say. It definitely works for me. But I don't want to like critique it too much at this point. But I just feel like it didn't build anything. If you go and look at what they're trying to frame these around, which is like the Bond films or whatever, they're always trying to up the ante from film to film, one way or another. Maybe not like action every time, but trying to make the story better or whatever. This is a carbon copy of the first film in all of the best ways and the worst.
And the Silencers was drawing from 2 Hamilton books.
Yeah.
And whereupon this one is just drawing from 1. So I think the Silencers had a little bit of an advantage in that regard. There's a little bit more there. I mean, you guys covered it last time, so I won't repeat it. But I mean, what they did, at least with the first 3 movies, it's like they took the Hamilton books and like broke them down to like the key elements, like A to B to C to D, etc. And then they like turned them into more glamorous locales. So like, for example, I said this book was based in the United States. In the movie, they turn it into Monte Carlo. Dean did not want to go to Monte Carlo. Apparently his mother was seriously ill at the time. So he didn't want to go. So they sent a second unit to get all the exteriors and film the car chases and stuff. So, but but that's what they did. It's like Monte Carlo is a lot more glamorous than Chesapeake Bay in the United States. So
just a little.
Sure, I totally get that. I think like on my side of things, I didn't see any growth. And please hold your puns back there, folks. I can hear you all working overtime on that one. I was expecting to see some difference. I thought they might have learned some lessons from the first one and evolved, because I know that there's 2 more. So there's obviously some potential for future films. So I had assumed something went right with this one. I don't dislike it. I don't like it any more than I liked the first one. But Cam, I'm interested to hear what you think.
I wonder though if like part of the issue is a really fast-tracked schedule. Mm-hmm. So it's like, look, that worked. Kind of let's replicate that. And it's just like maybe the issue of sometimes adaptation. They're like, pick the elements but frame it in the way we're comfortable with, so you kind of got something that was samey maybe a little bit. But for me, this one, I think I liked it a little less than the Silencers. I do really enjoy the elements of like the Matt Helm film world, like all of the characters and just kind of like the silliness of it. Like, this movie is incredibly watchable because of Dean Martin just carrying you through this movie in such a casual, low-key way. Mm-hmm. And just the way other characters play off him, I burst out laughing at the end when his boss is like blowing him kisses from a helicopter. Like, there's like no like kind of, tightly wound tension to it. It's just this kind of lush character just kind of ambling through this world. And so like that stuff I enjoyed, but I felt like there was a big hole here, which the Stella Stevens factor, where I felt like she contributed so greatly to the success of that first movie with so much of her comedic take on the material and just helping carry that movie through. Whereas I felt like the Ann-Margret character didn't have as like great a material to play with. Ann-Margret is every bit as, talented, or perhaps even more so, and could easily do that sort of thing, but it just didn't feel like they were inspired in that sort of way. And so the movie, maybe it just doesn't have kind of the comedic focus I felt like the first one did. So they relied more on, the spy plot, which some of it was fun, and we'll go into stuff like that I think, that worked and what didn't. But like, I found the movie relied a little more on action, and I didn't think the filmmaking of the action sequences was particularly strong, especially when we're talking about like the final chase on the hovercrafts and things like that.
So just to drill down into what you just said there, Cam, I just want to double check that we're all clear. You didn't find any comedy in this film. You took the Ann-Margret dancing sequence for 10 minutes completely deadpan serious. Like there was
No. It's like this one definitely has comedy because like Dean Martin's funny and there's definitely moments. But like you look at how the first movie is driven by comedy. It's the play-by-play of Stella Stevens and Dean Martin together. Like that's what is the. It's like the, it happened one night kind of factor that really carries that movie, whereas this one just doesn't have that.
Well, we'll keep this under your hats to when you get to the Wrecking Crew, because because Sharon Tate is definitely in Stella Stevens mode.
Yeah.
You have the same director as the Silencers, Phil Carlson. Back in in 2019, the Wrecking Crew was featured prominently in Tarantino's movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You have this scene where Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate, goes into the theater to go watch herself in the Wrecking Crew. But but when she's watching the movie, it's the real movie. It's not a recreation of the movie.
Yeah.
So I saw it the first night it was out, the Thursday night preview, and so like the next night I popped in the Wrecking Crew and watched it again. And and my understanding is, and again, you can get into this when you get to the Wrecking Crew, is that Dean Martin wanted to work with Sharon Tate again, but then she was murdered, and then that was one of the, Dean kind of, that's kind of one of the reasons he eventually said no more. I mean, they did do pre-production on the Ravagers, but I think he really did like working with her. And I've seen some pretty interesting behind the scenes photos from that film where Bruce Lee, who was his official title was karate advisor, and he actually substituted for Dean Martin in one stunt, which I didn't notice that till I saw the movie again in 2019. When I was watching, I thought, what? Wait, freeze it! Like, oh, I never noticed that before. It's anyway. Again, I think, again, when you get to the Wrecking Crew, you might want to compare Sharon Tate to Stella Stevens. They both have red hair.
Yeah.
So does Ann-Margret, to be fair. And
true.
To speak to your point about Ann-Margret, I will agree. I think Stella Stevens was stronger, but I think on the terms of checks and balances, I think Karl Malden is a stronger villain than the one we had in the Silencers. So whilst you do lose a little bit of that Stella Stevens energy, what you gain is much more of a sort of megalomaniacal 60s style Bond villain that doesn't have the problematic elements of Sun Z from the Silencers.
Right.
True.
Which is interesting because in the book, the lead villain was actually a woman, and her husband was like the weaker character. But they dispensed with that and made Karl Malden the lead villain, and he's pretty good. He's even doing a little takeoff on Bond villains at the very start when we first see him, because he's in the shadows and all this stuff, and then he issues an order and the thug says what, and then finally Karl Malden comes out from the shadows, kill them.
It definitely has the dynamic between him and Coco in this movie that I can totally see being, in a slightly different version, a husband and wife team.
Well, it definitely has that element to it, or also on like the other side of things, like a cuckold situation. It feels like she's in control and he's like a willing participant in the whole scheme of things, but they just weren't willing to go into that, really.
Yeah. And she was played by Pamela Sparv. Last name was Sparv. I can't remember the first name now.
Camilla.
Camilla Sparv. She was one of producer executive Robert Evans' many ex-wives.
Oh boy.
I'm going to call her Spamela Carve for the rest of the now, just for the record. But I guess let's focus down and talk about things that we did enjoy about this film. Bill, give us something to start us off. An element or a scene or a person, anything you enjoyed.
Basically Dean Martin throughout. It's like, again, if you like Dean Martin, he delivers what you're looking for, and it's interesting. The 1 week, actually, I find it the weakest part, but again, it's through having read the books. James Gregory is the boss guy. He actually kind of matches the Hamilton's description of the boss, but he's way too nice. He's far too nice. The Mac of the book would never have blown a kiss to Matt Helm. I'll tell you that right now. He was one mean bastard.
It's like when you watch the Flint movies, it took the boss 2 movies, or kind of like 1.5 or whatever, to become like the real Flint fanboy. This boss is pretty much a Helm fanboy from moment 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't disagree. I think Dean Martin is by and far the best thing about this film, Whereas I
Yeah.
think in the silences, you could have made an argument that Stella Stevens may have been the best thing about the film.
Yeah, that's how I felt with that one. I think like Dean Martin here, there's just like this like I don't know of a movie star that has this kind of like very like low key like star wattage where it's like he just kind of
Like an energy to him, like a magnetism.
he just kind of can also like stroll through a movie like this. And I've seen, reviews at the time or even, more contemporary who are like, Dean Martin is sleepwalking through these movies, but it somehow works. And I kind of get it. It's like he just has this like very, very, very relaxed energy for a lead, which you typically would say doesn't really work for a lead because you need them to be a little bit propulsive to carry you through the movie, but it somehow works. Like it establishes a tone and everything kind of works into it really well. The other characters play off it well. The way he deals with villains is interesting. It doesn't feel like they're just replicating like the Bond formula.
No.
It just adds an interesting dynamic to everything.
I mean, for example, okay, he picks up his car at the Monte Carlo airport. He's driving, and he's like, he's checking out the equipment that's in the car. And then there's what's supposed to be a bottle of booze, and he's opening up the bottle of booze. Oh, great! While he's driving, and then you hear Mac's voice, "Put me down," and he's like nonplussed for a second. Then he looks in the bottle, and it's a little tape recorder going. That's right. I figured this would be the quickest way to get you your assignment. And he goes, "What a terrible thing to do! A beautiful bottle of booze." And of course, you couldn't get away with that today.
Well, he immediately pulls out a hip flask and starts drinking from that whilst driving. You're like, well, this is the 60s, guys.
Yeah. And he says to the flask, "Don't you say anything to me either."
And also, like, you can't watch these movies in 2022 and not acknowledge, like, how sexist they are.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
But, like, the way that Dean Martin plays the scenes, it has this, like, I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't come across as, like, overly creepy, which a lot of movies do of this era. Like, there's this kind of, like, very, like, mild-mannered playfulness to it.
It's like a disarming nature to it.
Yeah. It's more of, like, this very, like, low-key charm versus, like, this predatory thing, which you see in Bond movies of the time or a lot of movies of this time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of fun just watching him walk around and just be in these rooms with these characters. A lot of the time, I feel like he's just ad-libbing through scenes. He's probably not. It's probably very precise language to really get the best out of Dean Martin.
Yeah.
But it just feels like there's quips a lot of the time. Like when he's in the police station just making jokes about being in the lineup. And you just think, like, it's funny stuff. And it just feels like it's so off the cuff and natural. But I think that's actually the gift of Dean Martin and what he has to offer as an actor, that he feels so natural in these situations.
Yep. Yeah. The lineup, Patty, Maxine, and Laverne.
Was that a reference to something that I'm not getting?
The Andrews sisters from the 40s.
Right.
Yeah.
Even the way that, like, he factors into action. Like, his fistfights are fun to watch because they're interesting. I don't think Dean Martin was doing heavy choreography with the fight unit, but it's still, like, kind of interesting to watch. And even, like, there's the bit where he, like, infiltrates the, like, whatever, the plant or whatever, and you just see him on this, like, conveyor belt, and then, like, flopping off the conveyor belt into a pile of dirt, and probably a stunt man. But it's like, you don't see that in a Bond movie. You don't see a character that just goes, like, flopping down and rolling down a hill of, like, rock.
Well, it's because Bond cares about his image, whereas I don't think Dean Martin cares. Like, I don't think Matt Helm really gives a monkey's what he looks like. So he's just there. He's just hanging out and getting the job done.
Yeah.
Well, he's a handsome looking guy. He says he knows he's handsome. Like, he doesn't have to worry about, getting all gussied up. He's like, he gets a little dirty. Like, fine, he'll take a shower when he gets back to the hotel.
What about you, Cam? Something you liked?
I think for me, kind of jumping off the Dean Martin, like, what really jumped out to me in this one was just the world of Matt Helm in this movie. Whether it's like the gadgets, things like the the gun with the delay, which is incredibly stupid, and
So
kind of a replica of the reverse gun from the silencers. But, like, the way they work in these gadgets is fun. It doesn't feel like they're just ripping off Bond. It feels like they're actually having fun with them and making them a little more heightened. I like the freeze gun stuff, which feels like very 1966 Batman.
Yeah.
I'm sure Mr. Freeze.
This whole film has that vibe to it, to be fair. Like,
Yeah,
it
it
really
does.
feels like a product of, like, if it was made next door to Batman 66, you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But, like, you look at a movie like what was it called? The Liquidator, which has like its really goofy elements, and then a lot of stuff that maybe feels a little slower or not as interesting. The entire world applies here, where it's like you see him in his apartment with the sliding bed again. You know, they repeat that gag from the previous movie. So that stuff feels like I know this world. But then you like carry that onwards, and when you've got like the villain show up with like the chrome head, who reminded me a lot of a like F-grade Spider-Man villain called Ramrod. But like elements like that, just make the world feel fun. And it's the sort of thing that like I can understand why there was an appetite for this franchise, because it's fun to hang out there, even if, you know, say for me, I'm not finding it paced particularly well towards the back half. It's just kind of fun to take in the sights and sounds.
Well, and also speaking of the villain, the henchman with the steel head, Iron Head, I think he's billed in the titles, is like Matt Helm, you know, ends up grabbing him, or was it Susie? Anyway, ends up grabbing him with a magnet and like takes him up. It's like, wait a minute. It's like,
I've seen this before.
11 years later, that's what Bond does with Jaws. Yeah, except with his teeth instead of his head, but you know, same principle.
No, it's definitely. People say that like Bond invents all this stuff. It doesn't. A lot of the roots of Bond are found in other spy films in the 60s and actually previous to the 60s as well.
I mean, there's a whole scene where he drives like a hovercraft onto a street, and I'm like, wait a second, this is like Moonraker.
Yeah, exactly. Although I will say they missed a beat by calling him Ironhead. I wrote down Leadhead.
The Leadhead, okay. There is actually a Rob Zombie song called Ironhead, and now I am wondering if that is a tribute to that character, because he does like doing songs about kind of obscure pop culture.
Rob Zombie, if you're listening, give us a call.
That's right.
For me, I mean, you kind of touched on the bits I like. The guns are great. The ice gun made me laugh to no end, and I thought the going back to like the gun from the first one, the backwards firing gun. First time I saw it, I thought it was the stupidest thing ever. By the end of the film, I'm like, I love this. I want one myself. And then in this one, I thought, a delayed gun? How useless is that? And by the end, I'm like, it's brilliant. Brilliant. They could have an army of them. It'd be great. The amount of times and interesting and clever ways they worked it into the sort of fight sequences and things like that. I just thought it was genius stuff. For me, in terms of likes, I am going to highlight Ann-Margret. I know she didn't quite work for you as much as Stella Stevens did, Cam, but I just think every time I saw her on screen, she's just a dynamo, she's full of energy, and she's like charging headfirst into this film, whatever the story is. And she's just great to hang out with, along with Dean Martin. Very easy on the eye, which doesn't hurt as well, to be fair. And yeah, I think she was a good accompaniment to Dean in this film.
Well, she was someone who just emerged onto the scene like as a fully formed movie star, pretty much, and that charisma just carries into this movie. It's kind of invaluable, because if you have an underwritten character like this one here, you suddenly cast Ann-Margret, and it just jumps off the screen in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Well, because like I'm sure the script said like dance like there's no tomorrow, and she goes, "All right, let's do it."
Yeah.
Well, and again, there's some things they can't teach you in acting school, and one is, you know, some people, you know, the camera just loves them, and just the audience attention goes. I forget the name of the movie. Cam may have mentioned it was the last Frank Capra movie, and she has a small role in it, Pocket Full of Miracles. And you know, and it's like, you know, it's a small role, but like, you know, anytime she's on screen, your eyes go toward her. And, you know, that was just, like you said, like practically a fully formed movie star, almost from the very beginning.
Have you ever seen the State Fair remake she was in?
Parts of it on TV.
Yeah. Like, she's a small supporting role in that movie where she, you know, is kind of the seductress who works for the State Fair, who kind of comes on to the son of the family. And it's like, again, a small supporting character, but just comes alive in that movie, and it's very clear why she was marked for leading roles shortly after.
I just, before we move on to dislikes, I just wanted to shout out as well. I think Lalo Schifrin does a fantastic job again with the score with this one. There's a couple of moments where I feel like they could have used some music. I'm not sure why they didn't. Like some of the car chases, I felt a bit like empty.
Yeah.
But when there was music, I think it was fantastic.
I feel like the overall package of the Helm films, they understood quicker than like the Flints. I love a lot of the elements of the Flint movies, and I do think the original Our Man Flint, I should say, is like pretty superior to a lot of the 60s spy films we've seen. But I think as an overall franchise, the Helms feel more confident in knowing exactly what they were right from the step.
Yeah, they knew the world they existed in and the rules and what worked, which I think is the important thing, because it was very much, let's have Dean Martin on the screen at all times.
Yeah.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Calling all agents. Independent podcasting, much like the spy game, requires considerable resources, whether it's research, equipment, hosting, or of course constructing a top secret volcano lair. We're putting out the call for your support.
That's right. As you may know, we've activated the Spy Hearts Patreon, home of our ever-growing lineup of Agents in the Field episodes where we decode non-spy films from your favorite spy actors and full film commentaries with more intel than a Basil exposition briefing.
Cam, what have we got in our crosshairs this month?
Catch up with reviews of Sudden Impact and Desperado, plus our commentary on 1984's Cloak and Dagger is out. All hail Jack Flack.
And if that sounds delicious, then become a true spy hard today and join the circus at patreon.com/spyhards. But before this message self-destructs, Cam, resume the spy jinx. Well, let's take a look at dislikes now. Let's put our seats down and look at the screen above. Gents, let's go for Bill first. A dislike you had.
Well, I mentioned briefly in passing, James Gregory is a good actor, but there's just something that's a little off-putting. And again, maybe it's because I've read the books. Just again, Mac should not have been blowing a kiss at Matt Helm. At the end there.
You wanted that kiss yourself, didn't you, Bill?
Yeah,
I can tell.
And I could have done without the polka dotted shorts gag.
It's the only way to fly.
It's the only way to fly. Yeah. But again, you take it for the period it was made in. So yes, it's sexist and so forth. But as a television performer, as a stage performer, nightclub performer, he threaded the needle, because on one hand he seems to be leering after women, but at the same time he kind of lets you know that he's married with kids,
right?
and with and not little kids either. Like Dean Paul Martin's already in his like 20s or whatever in this movie. So it was kind of like a wink, kind of like this is an act, right? Kind of thing. Whereupon, Connery seemed more dangerous, and today there are a lot of people do not like his interpretation of Bond, and so anyway.
I totally I get the point for sure, and some of Connery's scenes in retrospect, which we've dealt with, we've covered those films now. They're not great, and I think a lot of people would, if they were remade now, make different choices. But it's hard to sort of do that sort of post-morality thing where you look back on things and judge them by today's standards. So I'm not here to do that particularly, but I will say about this, I think Dean, exactly as you said, Bill, sort of does a very good job of walking that fine line between being overly creepy with people and charming.
There's like a sense he kind of wants, and I mean like the performer wants everyone to have a good time. And he's trying to get that across. And I do like even like a scene where he goes to the discotheque and is suddenly like your dad at like a club, looking completely clueless and just like in over his head. I like that he is allowing himself to be seen as kind of like the old hipster dude.
Yeah. Isn't it kind of scary that all three of us are at an age where we would be going through the same issue in a club right now?
That was my entire life, was walking to clubs and being like that.
Dad. Yeah. I don't know if that's necessarily a dislike though, Bill. Is there something particularly you want to point out as like a dislike?
No, you know what? Aside from
Gregory,
aside from Mac, Not really. For one thing, the movie is well under 2 hours, so it's like, boy, it's not like watching No Time to Die and like, I gotta go to the bathroom. It's just, it does move. I mean, I suppose there are some individual scenes that could move a little better, but it's like, you check in, you have a good time. Got great title sequence. You get Dean Martin. You get, and like you said, Karl Malden, he's a pretty good villain.
Mhm.
So
Overqualified, probably, but yeah.
but it's probably, but it was probably one of those things where probably a deciding factor in taking the job, whatever they offered him in terms of money, it's like, I get to work with Dean Martin, have a good time for 12 weeks or however long the shooting schedule was. So overqualified. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
I'll take Karl Malden in this over Karl Malden in $1 Billion Brain.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like that character had maybe a little more intrigue to him.
Sure, I think I just like the wackiness of this one.
And also,
Sure.
it's also pretty, of course, Karl Malden's ultimate undoing comes from the delay gun, where he's like actually putting the barrel next to him. And then Dean's like counting it down, 8, 9, blam, blam. Yeah.
I didn't think it was weird they chose to do the 2 shots and then it was actually delayed twice. I know it's like a really finicky thing, but like I thought if you pulled the trigger twice really quickly, it would go wait 10 seconds and then on the next second do the second shot, not 10 seconds and then 10 seconds again. But that's a finicky thing for sure. Cam, what about you? Something you disliked?
I think for me I think I'm gonna have to disagree with Bill on pacing issues for me. Whereas I found this one, I had real issues with just how slow it began to feel when it was focusing on some of the more convoluted spy plot stuff and those action scenes that really take over the back half. The silencers had a similar problem, and I think mentioned that as my dislike for the silencers, which was like, the car chase and things like that. The car chase here is the same thing, where it feels like it's almost happening in slow motion. Here, it's like, I think it's like that there's more focus on those things, and whereas I don't have that kind of, squabbling chemistry between the two leads carrying me through the movie like I had in the first one, much more attention is paid to these things. And it just felt like they really slowed the film down for me. And let's be honest, the plot of this movie is so simple. It's like they kidnap, Solaris, which I can't believe they named the scientist Solaris, the guy who has the sunbeam. But, like they kidnap the scientist and they're holding him captive. Matt Helm has to go free him. Somehow they make that feel very slow and labored to get to the end point.
Yeah, I remember like watching it, stopping at one point and going, wait, why is everyone doing what they're doing right now? Like, what is everyone's motivation? But maybe that was just me losing interest.
I think the first half hour or so, I felt like the Karl Malden character was very confusing. And then he like clicks in probably about half an hour in.
Sure. I agree with you, Cam, in the sense of having the same issue as the first one, because I had the same issue with you in that too. It's I enjoy the moments where it's Matt Helm hanging out.
Yeah.
Like it's the same situation, the problem I had with Thunderball. I like hanging out with James Bond on the island, but as soon as he goes underwater, I'm like, oh man, just pull the plug, brother. This is not worth your time. And so all of the spy stuff in this is just like Thunderball underwater for me. I'm just not interested in it. I want to see like Dean Martin charming his way through a discotheque or a police office or something like that. Of course, the plot needs to happen because this is a film.
Yeah.
And so I sit there and kind of go through the motions until it ends. But I don't think the action's quite up to snuff to keep my interest during those sequences either.
I wonder if, at least for me, maybe for you, the problem is that like the comedy has this incredibly relaxed, breezy vibe to it, which is not a tone that meshes well with action.
Sure. I'd like to think that we could go sort of see beyond that.
I think it actually makes things feel slower, though. When you shoot the whole movie with that sort of tone and sort of style, it makes all the action and espionage feel very slow.
You know what? I'm going to be really curious when you guys get to the Wrecking Crew. Because I think they actually ramped up the action sequences in that movie because you've got Bruce Lee choreographing the fights.
Sure.
Right.
And Dean Martin fights. He does a lot of kicking, which he doesn't do in any of the first 3 movies. And just that's something to kind of squirrel away for when you eventually get to the Wrecking Crew.
Well, you'll spill your drink if you kick.
Yeah.
Dean Martin won't do that. And I will ask a question. Is he the highest functioning alcoholic we've ever seen?
He's up there.
Supposedly, when he was like doing his drunk act, he was really drinking apple juice.
Yeah.
Supposedly.
I'd totally buy it if it wasn't. I totally buy it. Dean Martin was doing an act. But
Yeah.
the character of Matt Helm
Oh, right. Yeah.
has to be
Yeah.
a functioning alcoholic because he carries a hip flask
While he's driving.
While he's driving, and he has an assigned bottle of whiskey with him or whatever it was. Like it's government issue alcohol to carry him through a mission. I don't think you see him, and even his boss, even McDonald, issues him with a drink during a briefing sequence. They are pushing him into alcoholism. It's a tough watch. It's really sad, actually.
He's not as high functioning as like Jackie Chan in Drunken Master 2, but yeah, he's very, very effective.
I just saw one more Donald Hamilton thing that kind of stands out. And I'll be curious what your reaction was. At one point, Dean Martin tells Susie, he says, "Remember, Susie, nobody dies for nothing." Now, that's a Hamiltonism. And it goes back to the first-person narrative of the book, where it's like essentially like, I apparently killed the agent I was just supposed to beat up. But this is why I've got to take over. It's like nobody dies for nothing. We say that in our business. Nobody dies for nothing. It's this moment of seriousness from the book that shows up in the movie. And I'm just curious if you guys noticed it at all.
No, it didn't jump out to me.
No, I don't think it jumped out to me either, actually. I just sort of saw it as a tossed off line.
Okay. All right. I was just curious.
No, it's a fair point. And I wouldn't be surprised if more of those Donald Hamilton-isms, as it were, make it into further sort of films, because you have to use the source material. There's Fleming lines in Bond films now.
Yeah.
They're still quoting back. I suppose dislikes for me, I'm kind of in the same boat as Cam, the hovercraft, perhaps, as Cam. Yeah. I think it lacks some tension. It lacks some pace. The bits I like are the bits that don't resolve the plot, so you can't have them all the way through, which is unfortunate. I will also say that whilst it is nice to see perhaps one of the earliest hovercrafts in a spy film, they make no use of the concept.
They make more use of it, though, than... Bill, I need to... do you remember, what was the Bond film where they had a hovercraft show up, but it's only like for them to like...
Spy Who Loved Me, isn't it?
Die Another Day.
No, okay, so before that, it's like literally just transporting them to a location.
Oh, Diamonds Are Forever.
Is it Diamonds Are Forever?
Yeah. It's like Connery talks to Moneypenny, who's in her uniform at the customs. It's like, anything you'd like me to bring back from Holland? Diamond in a ring? Would you sell for a tulip? And then he drives off, and he drives into, his little car onto the hovercraft, which is going to take him to the Netherlands. So yeah, it's one scene. Yeah.
Yeah, this movie does more with a hovercraft than Bond did until Die Another Day.
Yeah.
That's fair. It's a shame because I lamented the lack of a strong villain in the first one. I got a stronger villain in this one, and I still don't like the finished product. So I feel like I'm wondering going forward if the missions and the spy plots, as it were, in these Matt Helm films can keep my interest, or they can learn to find a way of walking the line between hanging out with Matt Helm, which I find fun. He's an effortlessly cool chap to watch, Dean Martin. Along with these spy plots, I want to see him try and mix, because so far in these past 2 films I've struggled.
I couldn't help but laugh to myself when I was watching the finale of this movie, where they're at the plant and it's so just like low energy of characters walking around and fooling guards, dropping hairpins and machinery. And I was like, oh my God, this is almost the same as the finale of Diamonds Are Forever, which I used to always laugh about and be like, what is going on in Diamonds Are Forever? Why is the finale of this movie characters just kind of like wandering through a finale of a Bond movie? And it's like, you watch this movie and you're like, oh my God, like you can see how much this kind of influenced the Bond franchise.
Mm.
But I mean, it doesn't add a lot in terms of kind of like leaving you on a high by the end of the movie.
No, it's not a nice button to end on. I actually would say the giant red throbbing thing from the first one was actually more of a visual thing to end on.
Of course, yeah.
This has nothing throbbing about it.
No, I mean, you've got him in like the shaker. I guess that's maybe the big thing to remember from the finale.
Sure, or like the
guns.
Yeah, I guess the shaker or the guns. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the hovercraft, like, melee, I
Yeah.
suppose. But hey-ho, they don't all have to work at the end. We had bits we enjoyed throughout. But we were talking about comparisons, I think, before we start to wrap up and we go to final notes. Man, Austin Powers is all over this film.
Oh, yes.
Like,
oh, yes.
People think, and I will shout this to the hilt, I will scream it to the mountains.
Yeah.
It is not... Austin Powers is not a James Bond spoof. It's a spoof of 60s spy films. And a lot of what it does is it takes from things like this, from the Flint films. And you look at that discotheque scene. I'm pretty sure that's like the Gia Caridi scene with Robin Swallows in Austin Powers: The Spy Who Shagged Me. I'm pretty sure he does some other discotheque stuff too in the other ones. Like that whole like funky psychedelic kind of 60s energy thing is exactly what they're doing in Austin Powers. You never see that in Bond.
No, you see it in like in Flint also. But yeah, for sure.
And like, Bill mentioned it earlier. I was going to make a big thing about it, but like it is exactly right. Ironhead, there's a lot of Jaws there.
Mm-hmm.
The magnet, like his strength, his size is. I mean, I don't know how much of horror is in Jaws,
right?
Like in terms of the character from the book itself, but a lot of the imagery and I think what they do with him, and especially in The Spy Who Loved Me, is found in this film.
And when you say horror, you mean horror from the book Moonraker, right?
No, from The Spy Who Loved Me. The book, The Spy Who Loved Me.
Was horror in the book Spy Who Loved Me? I haven't read that one.
Yes, he was.
Okay.
He has braces. He doesn't have steel teeth, but he does have braces. That was
But what about you, gents? Any sort of final notes? Anything from you, Bill?
A totally minor trivia thing.
I love it. I love trivia.
Schifrin's discotheque music shows up in another Columbia/Screen Gems production, the pilot to The Flying Nun, which a scene in a discotheque. And it's like, the pilot was scored by Dominic Frontieri, but they must have like, hey, we got this leftover. We got this Schifrin music. Let's just stick it in there. I discovered
it's called the pilot to The Flying Nun.
The Flying Nun, starring Sally Field. A nun who could fly. She was only 90 pounds, and her cornet provided the aerodynamics. And she's in Puerto Rico, and the wind blows her, and she flies. Ran for 3 seasons on ABC.
I wish you're definitely not joking, but like a part of me wishes that you were.
I think though, Scott, you and I saw Harlan Ellison on stage at a Star Trek convention, and I think he worked on The Flying Nun briefly because he mentioned going because he had a thing for Sally Field, which is why he took the job. He didn't put it in quite as innocent of terms.
That sounds like Harlan Ellison to me. To be fair, I had a very unfortunate meet with him at a Starbucks, but
that's right.
Well, not as unfortunate as Adrian Samish, who the ABC guy who's got his hip broke getting into an argument with Ellison.
Was it about the rights to something? It's usually about that.
No, it was had to do with the show Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. They're in some conference room, and Ellison felt Samish was being very disrespectful and lunged at him, and there was this giant model of the Seaview sub that fell on Samish and supposedly broke his hip. And this shows up in a number of Ellison obits. So yeah.
Oh. I'll have to look that up.
I know I'm dangerous and you guys flash the stuff in front of me, but
no. Cam, did you have anything? I've got a couple.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things I'll mention. We've talked about Bond things that obviously had origins here. You had the Dart cigarette as well, which we would get the Dart gun 1 year later in You Only Live Twice. That one jumped out to me as well. Also, another spy connection. We had the the silver dollar with the pin in it. Spend the dollar, Bridge of Spies.
Spend the dollar. Yes, sir. I had that as one of my notes, so I'm glad we're in Simpatico there.
Yeah. Another moment that made me laugh that we haven't referenced was when the death was faked of Matt Helm, and the boss throws the wreath in the empty pool. That made me laugh so hard.
Goodbye,
I didn't
Matt.
catch that, actually. Yeah, okay.
It's just like this, like eloquent goodbye, and then he just like hurls this wreath. It's like thunk on the floor of like an empty bathtub.
Empty bathtub is burnt out because
Yeah.
it was it had exploded from the helio beam or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
If anyone could figure out how Dean Martin and Matt Helm, I should say, knew about this plot and was able to get that woman killed, but not him.
Did she die? She shows up at the end.
No, she didn't.
Oh,
She's in the group.
No.
When all the playmates are there. She was standing there.
I don't think so. I think
I think she died.
I think
I'm pretty sure.
it was Miss January, and I think he must have like thrown her into the helio beam. But of course, it's obscured by we're shooting from the back of the bed. I don't know.
I can kind of solve it a little bit because there's a video on YouTube, a behind the scenes video for this film, introducing the Slay Girls, and there's 12 of them this time because of the 12 months of the year.
Yeah.
And Miss January is one of those Slay Girls. So if she is in the scene at the end where the Slay Girls betray him, I totally get it. But I think she's supposed to be dead.
It was very confusing for me.
We're all a bit confused.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. I think we've all had our orange juice in air quotes. Well, Cam, you used my spend the dollar trivia note. The only other thing I was going to bring up was that there are some agents that are assassinated before Matt Helm, and they're international agents. So there's a British agent named Ames. Fairly British name.
Probably James, right? Like they were just taking the A off or the J off Ames.
No, you know what? That was actually a code name of one of Matt Helm's in the book. It was a code name of one of Matt Helm's fellow agents.
Okay, fine.
Who had turned up dead investigating this situation. So.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so taking it from that, I don't mind that. That makes sense. French, Felipe.
Yes.
Not so much a French name. Japanese, tempura.
Right.
They couldn't go a film without making some sort of remark, could they?
No.
Well, but I'll ask because there was an American agent which turned out to be Matt Helm or what was his Lash Patron? Great name, by the way. But as we have a Canadian and an American in the room, what would be the Canadian and American sort of agent names?
Well, his code name is Eric, and it does say that on the photo.
Yeah.
And Eric,
does it? Eric?
Yes, and that was his code name in the books, which they never explain why it was picked as his code name. I assume it was because Matt Helm in the books had a Scandinavian ancestry, Sweden to be precise, same as Donald Hamilton. So it's, in that photo, of course, it's easy to miss the reference to Eric, but it's the Matt Helm picture. It's taken from behind, and he's kissing a woman, and he's holding up a glass, and on the photo it says "Note distinguishing characteristic." The glass.
Yeah, with the glass. Yeah, I remember that. I remember the glass. Okay, so we've got our American one already. It's Eric. I totally get the connection. Not very American, but Cam, you're on the spot now. What's the Canadian agent's name?
I don't know that we have like naming conventions or that are really that different at all from like an American naming convention. So to make it like ultra Canadian, I guess name him Moose.
Ooh, with like an umlaut on the O's or something.
I mean, if you want to, I suppose, but that wouldn't be very Canadian, I don't think.
No, I suppose it wouldn't actually. No. Well, Eric is somehow Scandinavian and American, so I guess I was trying to add some sort of influence there. But okay, yeah, Moose. Actually, it's a pretty solid nickname.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Also, Scott, I have a GIF assignment for you.
Oh.
Which is the character of Furnace running and jumping out the window when he is revealed as a mole.
I forgot to note that down, but I think I have a new contender for the best exit from the scene. It was originally Paul Newman in The Macintosh Man, which we have a GIF from and we have used online several times. I will now create the GIF for the furnace going out.
That's right.
Well, guys, it's a wise son who knows his own father, and an even wiser agent who knows the knock list. So it's time to ask the ultimate question. Bill, it's your second time in the hot seat. The question goes to you first. Is Murderer's Row making the knock list? Yes or no?
I'm going to say yes, because I have the feeling I might be the only one to vote for it. But
Own it. Own it.
so I'm going to own it. Yeah, I'll say yes. It's like, whatever weaknesses the film has are made up for by Dino. So
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. Cam, you're up. It's all still to play for.
Yeah, it's a no for me. I found this one breezy and enjoyable, but it just didn't connect with me the way the Silencers did. I think that's the superior of the Helms so far. So, yeah, it's a no for me.
It didn't quite penetrate your iron head.
Nothing can.
I've tried.
I know.
Lord, I've
It's
tried.
very frustrating for everyone around me. I apologize.
Yeah. Well, I think Bill telegraphed it a little bit, and I think our last hour and a half telegraphed it too. Much as I've enjoyed going back to the year 1966, I think I enjoyed my initial entry more than I did this one. There's a lot I enjoy about this film. I think Ann-Margret's fantastic. Dean Martin is always a treat to watch, and Karl Malden is a great villain. But somehow, the elements don't come together very well towards the end, and that last sort of 45 minutes, half an hour, the last act, basically, is just a slog to sit through for me. It has that real, like, Goldfoot ending problem as well, where it's just protracted sequences of, okay, sure, I guess we're going to do this.
Well, also with the Silencers, remember, they were picking and choosing from 2 Hamilton books, which I think helps. I think there's a little more. I mean, I voted yes on the knock list, but if you ask me which do I prefer, the Silencers or this, I would say I prefer the Silencers more. But I'll still vote yes for the knock list. I'm happy to be outvoted.
No.
No, it's been an adventure as it was, but it sounds like there is still one yes, but there is 2 no's, and as such, Murderer's Row is not making the knock list, and the dossier on the film is complete and filed as classified. Now, Bill, I said I had a question for you, and you kind of answered it just now by saying you prefer the Silencers out of the 2. But looking forward and knowing the franchise as a whole, what is your favorite of the 4?
I'd go with the Silencers. There are some issues with the ambushers, the next one up. Although it does have a femme fatale played by Senta Berger, who is like one of the sirens of the 60s spy craze. And her character is actually based on a femme fatale from Hamilton's books, but they don't call her that. The character's name was Vadya. So I think they dipped a bit with the ambushers compared to this, but I think they bounced back with the Wrecking Crew. They went back to the original director, Phil Carlson, and I think Sharon Tate's great. And I think having Bruce Lee, doing the fight scenes kind of gave the action sequences more energy.
You're giving me hope for the future Matt Helm films. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with imaginary guns in future films. But Bill, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you back on the show. I'm glad we didn't have Donald Sutherland doing a terrible Irish accent this time for you to suffer through. But yeah, I hope you've had a nice time revisiting the Matt Helm films for us. We've had a blast having you on. But if people want to hear more from you, obviously there'll be links in the show notes below. But where can people find you online?
Just look for the Spy Command. The URL is hmssweblog.wordpress.com. I also have a Man from U.N.C.L.E. episode guide if you want to take a deep dive into that.
Which we will be.
Yeah, because so I have a separate, it's a separate site. That was actually my first site, the Man from U.N.C.L.E., which I occasionally update.
Yeah, well, we plan on actually tackling the sort of film versions of the U.N.C.L.E. episodes, because I know we stick to films here, and I know they're sort of re-edited episodes, but they did get small releases, so I'll take it.
Not so small, the early ones. To Trap a Spy, the first one, actually has substantial amount of added footage from the pilot. But they were very thrifty. They then took the added footage, which had Luciana Paluzzi in it, and then put it in an episode, writing a whole new story around it. But
Genius.
I mean, you would, wouldn't you? You
Yeah.
really would.
Yeah. But, you know, because there are some people who think, oh, she did Uncle after Thunderball. No, she did Uncle first. Absolutely. I've seen that written in books, and I contacted one author. I said, no.
Well, it's that and Muscle Beach Party that really launched her career.
Yeah, there you go.
Which also had a shag dress dancing sequence.
Well, I know what Cam's wearing tonight.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Bill, again, thank you for coming back on the show. It's been a pleasure having you here, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks for having me. I had a big kick out of it. Thanks for having me.
Well, there you go, folks. That was the second Matt Helm film, Murderer's Row. It's been nice to hang out with old Dino once again. He never fails to thrill me with his bedroom antics. But Cam, the question goes to you. What have we got next week?
Yes, we are tackling the 2003 espionage thriller The Recruit, starring Colin Farrell and Al Pacino.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting when we have another great guest joining us, and we have a very special interview for everyone next week as well. We're actually speaking with the director of the film, Mr. Roger Donaldson, so watch out for that. If you enjoyed what you heard on the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts, and do not forget to follow us discreetly on social media at Spyhards. That's SPYHARDS on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, listeners,
To Matt Helm.